Welcome to Through the Eyes of a Maine Guide. Every journey holds a story. By sharing the wisdom of those who came before us, we keep their legacy alive for generations to come. Join me, Brennan Lane, as we explore the wild through the eyes of a Maine Guide. Welcome, everyone, to Through the Eyes of a Maine Guide with your host, Brennan Lane. I got Don Dudley here on my right and Donnie Helstrom on my left. This will be part 2 of the two-part series that we did with these two guys. If you didn't see the first episode, go on to our YouTube channel, hit subscribe, and watch it all. Now, did you guys in Canada too?
No.
You didn't?
No.
Just out of Mattagamon?
All in Maine.
Yeah.
All in Maine.
Is Mattagamon like the only place, or did you start?
Well, I worked for another lodge, but most of my experience is Mattagamon. Yeah. I also worked up north on Goodman's. I worked for them for quite a few years.
Yeah.
Yeah. But nothing in Canada.
Nothing in Canada.
No.
No, that was Canada was, of course, right now it would be a little difficult to be working over there, but it was quite a,
They got the bears. That's
oh boy, it was, yeah, we went over. I'd run into Mike Deraspino.
Yeah.
He used to be a taxidermist.
Right.
He was a bear hunter. I run into him. He was guiding bear hunters at Ross, up at Ross Stream, McNally's, I think it was.
Yeah.
And I just happened to run into him on the road and get talking. They just closed the spring season, and he said, "Boy, I was over and had supper over at Dacquam," he said, and the guys, they'd love to have some bear hunters. Well, that weren't long. I was over to Dacquam, and I went over and I worked, guided, 1 year, and the second year we was there, and about the third or fourth day, George that worked for me, he comes in and he said, "You see that guy sitting over across the street at the hot dog cart?" And I said, "No." I said, "There's been a guy over there," he says, with the suit on, he says, "all morning." I said, "Really?" I go out and we'd leave to take hunters out after lunch, and the guy comes to the hotel was leasing and asked for me because he waited till I was gone. It was an RCMP, and so he he just told him, give him the phone number, wanted me to call the next day. So I called and he said, "Could you come down and talk to us in St. George?" And I said, "Sure, I'll go down." Get down, he says, we've heard some good things about your bear hunt over there in Dacquam. I said, "Really?" I says, "Thank you." He said, "But you got no papers to be working here." He took me to customs. He took me to customs down to Armstrong and got me work papers, and it was one of them things that could have been a.
So he welcomed you more or less.
Oh yeah, we were at the last of it. I was over there about 35, 36 years, and when we got our work papers, on the stamp on where the work papers was exceptional progress, or it was. We had we had high ratings, but if somebody read it, that was the only reason we were there. That we were.
So they still doing the hunts?
Yeah, they
George?
still, yeah.
Yeah.
We're not. George that worked for me, that he took the business over, and then COVID kind of killed that. And,
Yeah. Right, getting across the border.
Yeah, getting across the border, and
Yeah.
but it was quite a little. You'd see wolves, not every day, but
Oh, really?
yeah, see wolves, and the first thing in the spring when you was baiting, every time you shut the four-wheeler off, there'd be 3,000 snow geese over your head heading to the Arctic. And,
Really?
I picked fiddleheads there along the main highway there one day, picking fiddleheads, and the big wildlife preserve right beside us. And if you were the length of this room apart, you couldn't hear each other if you yelled. The geese were so loud.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, there'd be, 20, 30,000 snow geese right there beside the
That's
beside
crazy.
the highway. Yeah,
Wow.
it was quite a place to, you know.
Yeah.
Hey guys, shout out to Northwoods Outdoor Supply, proud sponsor of Through the Eyes of a Maine Guide podcast. If you guys find yourself in Aroostook County and need any ammunition, firearms, fishing supplies, or any outdoor supplies in general, swing in and see what they have. They have a large variety of firearms, ammunition, ice fishing supplies, regular fishing supplies, and just outdoor supplies in general. Stop in and talk to Brandon. If you don't have it, I'm sure he can get it for you. They're located right in the Martin's Plaza next to Martin's and Tractor Supply. So make sure you stop in and show your support and say hi.
And lots of bears.
Lots of bears and plenty of time to hunt them.
Yeah.
Most nights it didn't get dark till 10 o'clock.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The difference in the time, I can't remember. Fellow that worked for me with the GPS, the legal shooting time in Forestville, Quebec on the river, and the legal shooting time above Labryville was almost 10 or 11 minutes,
Really?
the sunset.
Yeah.
Huh.
Just in a
Interesting.
hour and a half drive, it was.
Yeah.
No.
We're nowhere near 10 o'clock down here.
Oh no.
Not hardly.
No.
We're lucky if we see 8:30 this time of year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Getting there.
It's getting longer, yeah.
Nice.
You must have some interesting deer story or moose story or something you can share, eh?
We used to do a lot of deer hunts. Of late, we don't have as many deer, so it's not as big an issue today. But yeah, most of them were lost hunters, I guess.
Yeah.
And like somebody in the camps always didn't show up, so
Yeah.
you go looking. The fellow was telling me, I got him out about 3:30, was I had to walk him out. He had to take a hold of my belt. In other words, I had his gun,
Yeah.
and he had to hold on to my belt and walk. And he wasn't in very good shape, so it took us quite a while to get out. But
Yeah.
we got him out. But other than that, like I said, the deer hunting in if you go back in the 70s and 80s, it was really great. But
Yeah.
today, we just don't have the numbers anymore.
No, same up in Ashland where my camps are. That
Yeah.
When I first 87, I bought the camp, so 88 was the first year we had hunters in, and we had people passing on spike horns and people from
Yeah.
Pennsylvania spike horns and small 6 points and stuff, and still run better than 75% there for quite a few years.
Really? Yeah. What's the biggest one that you've seen?
Oh, I think weight-wise, 254.
254?
But that's
Some big deer were some big deer up in that country
Yeah.
back then.
But horn-wise, when we get done here today, I'll show you some pictures. Some deer that it's hard to fathom.
Yeah.
And there were some great hunters. The Pennsylvania guys,
Right.
I mean, they could go out, put a stand up 30 feet in a beech tree
Yeah.
at
And sit all day.
6 o'clock or 5:30 in the morning, and come out at 3:30 or 4 o'clock, and they, we'd sit at the table there through the late 80s, early 90s, you'd be sitting at the supper table and people telling about what they'd seen that day, and it wasn't uncommon for over 50 sightings
Yeah.
in
A day?
A day.
Yeah.
Holy.
It was
It was
a lot of the same deer. It
Right.
wasn't like,
Right.
Yeah.
but and it was different. I don't know how. At that time, some of the older guys that came from Pennsylvania, they all put in for doe permits, in Maine. And of course, being non-residents, a good percentage got doe permits,
Yeah.
and nobody ever shot a doe. you know, and I remember just, what's up with that? And, well, they're only giving out so many, I know, but he says, well, if we got the permit, they ain't going to be shooting the
That's
dogs.
right. That's
But
right.
that was their, that's how they were better, as far as,
Yeah.
I remember one fellow that said one day, just sitting this Friday, he said, do I have a scowl on my face? He says, I've seen deer every day.
Yeah.
I've seen deer every day. I just haven't saw something that I figured I want to bring home. Because back there, one of the guys, he got a fellow that worked for me and lived in Pennsylvania and worked both places, Maine and Quebec. And you go to New Jersey across the river from where he lived, and you shoot a doe and you could get another buck from it. You shoot another doe, you could get another buck from it. So I mean, they had unlimited.
Yeah.
They weren't
Yeah.
coming here for meat.
No, they weren't. They were coming here because they were 40 miles in the woods. 40 miles in the woods. They could sit all day in the stand and never see anybody else.
Never see a hunter.
Yeah.
There's something to that.
There's a lot to that.
Yeah.
There's a lot to that. Some of the people. I mean, you had, through the times, you have people that are, you remember. I always said on the bear hunt, nobody does anything extraordinary. The only people you remember the names.
Yeah.
Somebody that makes them, it screws up, and you always remember. But some of them people, I remember a guy that for years they hunted with us, and he was the world champion, 22 competition shooter, and the guy he came with him. Mike Poole was his name, and the guy that came with him made the rifles he hunted with. So
Really?
everybody's sitting there at the table one night, and the guy says, well, Mike, he says, you're actually world champion, or whatever it was. And Mike didn't talk about it, but his buddy said, it's been 3 years in a row he's world champion or something. And he says, what type of a group would you shoot with a 22 at 50 yards? He said, what do you mean? He said, well, how big a group do you shoot at 50 yards? He's 22 caliber. Yeah, I'm not shooting a niche group.
Yeah.
Right.
They're all going in the
Same hole.
Same hole.
Yeah.
But stuff like that, you just never, you don't forget.
No.
Yeah.
And the more you think about it, the more stuff that comes up.
I remember coming in on a Saturday night, and we had just 2 or 3 hunters left, and they're sitting there at the pole, and young Amish girl, early 20s, maybe 19, 20, I don't know how old she was, but she was with a group of Amish people, and she shot a bear that night. And everybody's standing there, and I look, and she's kind of standing back. And I walk over, and I says, how come you're not over there? She says, I just can't believe. And a smile that you'd never, 125-pound bear.
Mm-hmm.
But the things you remember, he used to be deputy commissioner, Dan Turlott there, the warden. That he worked for me one year. And we'd come in, and we had 6 or 7 bear on the pole. I don't think there was anything over 200 pounds. And we're standing back drinking the beer and just listening to everybody's story. And he says, my God, he says, there ain't a monstrous bear there. And I says, no, there's not. He says, but you can't even hear. Just the buzz. Just the buzz. Everybody talking at the same time. But that stuff is, every time you tripped over a rock and drove your nose into the mud, you could forget about all that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, do you run cat with dogs too? Bobcat? You did?
Yeah.
You must have some interesting wintertime cat stories.
I don't know about cat stories. You didn't see much of the hunt, but there was some good. I probably remember one over to Wynn one day when I had some hunters from Massachusetts. Actually, they hunted with me, bear hunted and cat hunted, and the old house across the road here, they put the foundation in and build a big stove for me, and so they hunted with me a lot. But we'd gone out one day and we turned the dogs out. It was about 20 below, so I'd walk the dogs up a ways. And finally the dogs got, the track was real good, so they wanted to go, and so we let the dogs go, and there's a beaver pond, big beaver pond. The dogs flew down the ice just screaming on that track, and they go right to the beaver house there, and they go by the beaver house, and all of a sudden the bobcat jumps out of the beaver house. And the dogs had run by him, but it was quite a little tussle after that.
He thought he fooled him there for a minute, didn't he?
Well, he wasn't fooling, but he wasn't. He knew he wasn't in safe haven.
Yeah.
Safe haven.
Probably my best bobcat story was one night we got the dogs, I'm going to say 3/4 of a mile up a ball trail on Mount Katahdin.
Mm-hmm.
They had a cat bait in a hole, and I think it was 10 o'clock or 10:30 for we were snowshoeing.
Yeah.
We were hunting down by A-ball way out of the park, but the cat had run up, and we went up there and come out the park road at about 10 o'clock at night before we got back to the truck. No shots fired.
No. Now, when did you start hound hunting right from the get-go?
Pretty much. I probably, 60, in 59 when I was in high school, in 60 we hunted with, there's a couple of guys from Millnocket that had hounds, and one fellow here in Medway, Rolling McLaughlin, and I hunted then just as when I was 17 years old, tagged along. And then when I started, after I got out of college, I went to college 61, 2, and 3, and into 4. And then it was 64, I bought my first hound. And that was mostly raccoon hunting, and we run bobcats. And then it just, at one time I think I don't know how many dogs I had a lot.
You started way before these. Now you started way before the technology nowadays with GPSs and all that stuff.
Oh
right?
yeah, you talk. The technology. I remember right here at the house, we went about halfway out. We see the towers coming down the road. The big radio towers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, right there as the road goes in, and it was all apple trees in there. Nobody lived in there back then. I don't know. This was probably 74, 73, 74, whatever, maybe. And George was working, and we went in the morning, only had one hunter. And I turned the dogs out, and they, they just screaming. So I went out on Route 116 and drove around. There's no road across behind here, and pulled up. And just one of them beautiful mornings. I mean, 35 degrees, not a whisper of a breeze. Stepped out of the truck and you hear the dogs treeing. They're right in front of us. I said, "You got to be kidding!" So I get the hunting, get all his gear. Of course, George had gone with the dogs.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, that's how we operated. He tried to stay with the dogs because you didn't have anything to do.
Yeah.
So we start walking. I cross my Dunkyunk stream out here and keep walking. I hit the road behind my house, and the wife's out here in the yard listening to the dogs tree. They treed up the road here about 400 yards from here. right behind the guy's house, and George had been there for an hour
Waiting, yeah.
waiting for me to get
You
the.
just want to give him the experience of the true walk, right?
Yeah, I guess but it was just so clear, you know.
Yeah.
But we.
There's nothing that beats the sound of a pack of hounds treeing on a cold
Yeah,
morning.
yeah. We had times that I remember without before the equipment. One time I run over to Springfield, and before you get into Topsfield, there's a lake. I don't know if it's Pleasant Lake. There's a lake back to the south
Okay.
of the highway.
Oh, yeah. What is that like?
It's quite a ways. The sporting camp's on it anyway. But George, of course, had gone with the dogs, and we drive in the road with the hunter, and we don't hear nothing, and all of a sudden here's George walking up this road. Now we're in Topsfield, and we started in Springfield, and he says the dogs were treed down on the lake, right, and they were within 15 foot of the water. And we went down and waded across, went in and killed the bear, and dressed him out and just left him lay there, and went back the next day to skin him. But we had to come back and try to get the dog. Of course, the dogs had come all that way, but you try to at 9 o'clock at night to get them dogs to swim back across the stream.
Yeah.
But you had to swim to come across.
Oh,
the
really?
stream. Yeah. But that was one that you would never forget.
I think a lot of that's lost nowadays with everyone with the GPSs and that stuff because they don't see the actual history.
You don't.
behind it.
Yeah. Oh, I lost a dog over the infield one time, over the infield Lowell, and the dog was gone for a week. So you did, of course, you had no radio collars and everything. There was a bunch of hippies over there feeding the dog.
Feeding them, yeah.
When they run out of money, or they run into a warden or something and told them that they had the dog, that the dog was living in the house. But they moved into it.
The dog never had it so good.
No, that dog never had it so good.
Yeah, I can't remember one time I had a big blue tick. Same thing. This was a bit before radio callers, and I was hunting down by Joe Mary, and the dog come out in the road, and he was probably the brightest dog I ever had. If he get out in the road and he wanted to ride, he'd limp. He'd actually limp. And some game warden, and he was coming from Brownville, and he brought the dog to Elmer Knowlton and Millnocket, but he got everything put the dog in the back seat of didn't have a truck yet, in the car, slammed the door right on the dog's tail. And so we felt bad, so we just, we got the dog in there, and of course all his clothes, he had his uniforms all hanging up, and the dog pulled them all down, made a bed for himself. Curled up, but it was a challenge, And I guess stories. I was cat hunting one day, and I brought one of my better bear dogs with me. And for whatever reason, I'd never cat hunted. He'd never run in the snow before. And he could smell the track, and he'd beller and beller, but he couldn't run the track in the snow. So we'd get in on a chase, and he just disappeared, and I come back, and he wasn't at the truck. And so we hunted down there for 4 or 5 days and never see any sign of him again. So you don't know if somebody picked him up or he got run over by the train down there. And about a month goes by, I get a call on the phone, and a woman there, she says, "Is it Mr. Helstrom?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." I says, "Mr. Helstrom says, I want you to know one thing. I'd never hurt a dog. I'd never harm a dog. I wouldn't do anything to, hurt a dog." I said, "Ma'am," I says, "what are you talking about?" "Well, I've got one of your dogs there." He No, I don't have, by now he's gone. Yeah, I said, what do you mean? She said, well, the dog has a collar with your name and phone number on it. I go back. Oh my God, that dog's still alive. And she says, I says, you've got the dog at your house? Oh yes, she says, sir, I was having problems with coons and my chickens. And so my next door neighbor come up and put a trap out, and he caught the dog. Because the dog had been living for a week behind her house eating her chickens.
Oh, it weren't the coons, it was the dog.
No, the same dog. One day I was walking Marsh Creek down here towards Chester, and walking out. Bear had got in the water down by the railroad tracks, and I was walking out with the dog. It was in October, and a couple partridge ran up over a bank, and I had 357 bird shot, and so I put a couple shells in my pistol, and the birds would, boom, I shot one bird and one running over the bank, and so I went up on top of the bank and shoot the other one, and I hear this, and I turned and I looked, and there's one wing sticking out of his mouth with this, and ate that bird whole.
Really?
Yeah, feathers and all.
He was hungry.
No, he weren't. He just evidently had
He was hungry.
Yeah, he was hungry. He wanted some fresh meat.
Yeah, the chicken lady there.
Chicken lady.
Yeah, the chicken lady fed him real good. But there was a lot of stories. But
Well, I'm sure as soon as we're done, there's gonna be a bunch pop up that you're gonna think of. That's usually how it goes with me. I don't think of it until after.
Right.
For 10 years now, I've got a pretty good Rolodex. It's full, but there's no grease fittings.
I hear you.
There's just no grease fittings. You meet classmates and you boys. Put
I hope they got a name tag.
Yeah.
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 Which when you go to a high school reunion, it's 50 odd years ago.
Yeah.
It's pretty hard to remember everybody.
But this I was sitting at McDonald's last year, and Paul come in with his wife, and so it'd been 60 some years since I'd seen him, 62 or 63 years since I'd seen him. And he walked in through the door at McDonald's, and
Yeah.
you knew, it wasn't like you even had to think.
Yeah.
Evidently, the Rolodex was in the right place.
Some people don't change a lot too.
No.
And some do.
Some do, yeah.
You got any other stories or anything you'd like to share, Don?
Oh, not that I can think of off the top of my head, but probably if I'd have planned ahead a little better, I could have arranged some, but no.
You're a big time beaver trapper, right?
Well, I got some trapping stories, but yeah,
Fire away.
I don't know about big time, but I've trapped.
I heard rumors you catching 1,000 a spring.
No, not that many. I don't want to skin that many. 463, I think, is the most, but that was winter.
That was winter.
It wasn't open water. That was through the ice.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that was a long winter.
Long winter.
Yeah, long winter.
That many beaver, you'd cut as much ice that was drank in New York City on New Year's Eve.
New Year's Eve, yeah. Oh, yeah, they chipped a lot of ice because there was no chainsaw. I never used a chainsaw then. This was all chisel. Believe me, you stayed warm.
Stayed warm. You must have had some close encounters, though, over the years doing that.
Oh, nothing serious. I've got wet a few times, if that's what you mean. I've been in a couple of times and I had to reach up and find my hat up here in the water.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
those
30 below. And
oh yeah, one time was probably a quarter of a mile from my truck. Maybe by the time I got to the truck, I could just about walk, but I had another set of clothes in the truck. But to get out of the ones I was in and into the other ones was near impossible. But I did. I survived it. Here I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is that the only thing you trap is beaver? Or did you do martin and fisher as well?
No, I trapped a little bit of everything. Foxes for a while were pretty valuable, so we
Yeah.
trapped foxes. You know, I couldn't remember the numbers, but I think fox at one point I think were like $85 a piece.
Yeah.
And all they would do was count them. They wouldn't even grade them. They
Really?
just count them and give you $85 a piece. So yeah, I did trap.
That's changed a little bit over the years.
Yeah.
Jeez, changed a whole lot. Yeah,
The same with the raccoons and, everything. They just,
Yeah. The raccoons for a while the same. I've seen raccoons like $30. Just on the bigger ones.
Yeah, well, I think George and I in 80, or I think it was 80, we average over $40
For coons.
for
Yeah.
coon.
Holy.
I think we had 365 coon.
That's back when you could make a living at it.
Yeah,
Well, you could now. There's enough coons because
Yeah.
nobody bothers them anymore. There's no market to speak of.
no, and that's when the year after that, it just went.
Yeah.
I bought fur for a guy in New Hampshire there for a while, and we stopped into his place, and I dropped off a bunch of fur, and he just shipped, I don't know how many thousand rats to the Canadian auction, and his phone rang every 3 minutes, and every time he just get wider and wider and wider.
Yeah.
I mean, he I don't know how much money he lost, but hundreds of
A lot,
thousands of
yeah,
dollars in just a half hour's time. They went from $16 down to $5,
Yeah.
and he'd paid, you paid over $10 or $11. Everything I'd bought, I'd paid,
Yeah. The speculators. Just tough
Ooh,
market.
yeah.
Tough to guess.
Well, you guys have any advice that you'd like to give out to guides either just starting to get into the industry or that are in it now currently?
Oh, I think it's a different world all of a sudden. I think there's a lot of people out there for recreation guides especially. I think guiding is perhaps on the upswing right at the moment. I see that they gave us a list of the new licenses last year, and I was surprised at the numbers.
Yeah.
That they're still getting, the amount of people taking the guides licenses. We're just not. We need to pick them up in the association. But I'm sure we get a percentage of them because they all get a brochure. But it's still there's a lot of people taking the tests. And, it's kind of a different world. I don't know if it's as much on the consumptive end as there is on the hikers and
Yeah.
snow sledders. And
But it's the same as any job. If you put everything into it,
yeah,
and pay attention, there's a living to be made.
yeah,
When I get out of the service and I worked on the railroad some with my father. My grandfather had worked 40-some years. My father worked 40-some years from the railroad, and of course in the winter if it snowed 6 inches, I was going to cat hunt.
yeah,
And they come down, and the guy come down and from Derby there and had a talk and said, you got a choice. You're either gonna guide or cat hunt or work on the railroad. And I said, well, my father's standing right there. I says, I guess I'll work on I won't work on the railroad. I'm going to be a guide. And at that time, when you walked out of there, when you quit, you walked out and got in your pickup truck and drove off, it would one deep breath. It wouldn't take care of it because you knew you'd made a decision that you're going to have to put 100% into it, or you're not going to make it.
yeah.
And that's the same thing today.
I'm sitting here getting goosebumps right now because that's literally what happened to me and my wife.
Yeah.
We decided that's what we want to do, and we packed everything up and we moved 5 hours north, and
Yeah.
no looking back, no regrets.
Yeah.
I mean, it's you got to be all in. There's no half. and
No,
half.
no. If you're gonna do it for a living, if you're gonna do it for a living, you've got to stay on top of it. You've got to have, I mean, you can't everything you can't do. Your finances and everything. You have to find somebody that's responsible enough, or even yourself. I'd majored in math in college, so I could, I was one of the lucky ones. I could add 2 and 2 and
Get 4.
get 2, 3, or 4, whatever I wanted. But it is. It's. I would never. There's no time in my life after the first probably 3 years, because I mean, I had a crew down here when I built the house across the street, the log house over there. I had people helping me, living here, that I was feeding, not paying,
Yeah.
and boys, you puckered it awful at times, but after that initial, when the phone started ringing and you just get a break, In my case, somebody come up on the bear hunt and when they went home, they had a couple of bear in the back that hides, and they'd stopped at on the interstate at a gas station, and somebody asked them, they see they've been up here hunting, and you asked them about it, and they gave them my name, and
Word of mouth.
and it went, and I mean, I would never say that I build everything. I had a taxidermist in Massachusetts that sent me, on the average, every spring, 80 hunters.
You used to take that many hunters in the spring?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Holy cow!
And you would have, and you send them back. If you sent 80 people up, he probably had 78 bear he handled.
That,
And
it worked out good for him because
he was,
business.
and he went out of his way. I mean, I've got mounts over there in the house. I've never paid for a mount. I've got mountain lions over there, and and bunches of stuff, but you get that break. Or the 3 guys that used to come together all the time, that put my foundation in and built the fireplace, and and built. I mean, actually, handmade a stove to fit in the cellar that I used for 50 some years. You put yourself in a position to survive and live, but you need some breaks too.
Yeah.
You try to make your own.
It's all in the relationships that you build too.
It
and the
is.
friendships.
It
Like
is.
some of my greatest friendships have come out of guiding.
Yeah.
A little scary at times, but it turns out well.
Yeah.
I moved up here with 2 kids, 26 miles in the woods, no power, no telephone. I got a telephone today, but I didn't in those days. So yeah, you wondered at the time if you'd made the right decision, like Don says, but you had to go with it because that's where you were.
You made that decision.
And if you didn't make it, you didn't make it.
You made the bed and you had to lay in it, right?
You made your own beds, yeah.
And that, from my standpoint, when they started the development of the Guides Association, and at that time, the emphasis wasn't on business for the guys. It wasn't like, we've got this tremendous magazine and we're going to send it out and you're going to be able to, get a lot of business from it, or, get a lot of business. Yeah. It wasn't that. It was, the Guides Association was saving your future.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and that's what the work was. It wasn't like to make you rich or make you, fill your beds or anything. You know, the emphasis of the work for the first few years was just to make sure we had the job.
Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
and that was scary. You know, the referendums and you
Yeah.
know, and I mean that was scary. And then too, when you look at the referendums, if you go through all the receipts of the money that come in, the amount of people that you would have never met,
Right.
you know, a turkey club from South Carolina,
Yeah.
somebody from West Virginia or Arkansas or Kansas, every state in the union, somebody
Somebody was kicking money in.
kicking money in, and
Yeah.
and you know I hadn't until you had called and asked about doing this. I'd never looked over, and I had to dig all the stuff out of my. I have a little museum down there, and I, dug it out and started going through it. And boy, I'll tell you, it's actually been fun.
Yeah.
You're just seeing stuff that wow.
Reliving it.
Relive
Yeah,
memories.
you relive your whole life, and you know, okay, you did real well. You made a good living. You don't have to worry, but when you look at it in the whole picture, it was the Idaho Hound Association
Yeah.
or the Montana Turkey Foundation
Yeah.
that sent money that
Helped us out.
helped us
Helped
out.
us out. Yeah.
You know, I
Of course,
mean,
we've reciprocated in a lot of them.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
get a chance to back different
back, yeah,
by sending monies also, which is good. You know, that SOS funds could be used that way too.
Yep.
If the state was having an issue,
Yeah.
with, I don't know, could be a whole different scenario than. Might not be bears. It might be
Moose or
moose.
deer or fish
Yeah.
or anything.
yeah. You don't, it's stuff is there's still a minority out there that's still trying to,
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We're not out of the woods by any means, but we're in a good position at
very,
this
very
point.
good position. And like you say, going back to what I said earlier there about the stepping into that banquet and being lucky enough to be sitting way back in the corner
Yeah,
so you could see everything
yeah.
and see the people that,
Just to show you on the Pass the Hat for the youth camp,
yeah,
they took in over $3,000.
Yeah.
Pass the Hat.
yeah,
Well, that's stop and think about that.
yeah.
$3,000.
That,
You know,
that was a lot of money. For
I've thought of, because I walked up around and dropped my money in the hat, and I
Yeah.
come back and there's Lance Wheaton there standing, and hey Don, how you doing? And you take 2 steps, and here comes Tenley Bennett,
yeah.
just right on the run, and you look and
Yeah.
it's
Unfortunately, I didn't make that one. That's one of the
Yeah.
banquets I had to miss, and family was sick, and
but
my
you
wife
see
was sick.
the people you see at that, from the past, the
Yeah.
Dave Tobies and Dale Tobies, and
Yeah.
and there's just been,
We've been lucky. We're on the good end of it,
yeah,
and I think the guides today are likely a lot better off than we were.
yeah. I don't know about that. It's yours, whole hell. Don't
But-
have this
but-
many stories.
I don't have as many memories now. But
Speaking of that, there's one story you was telling earlier about was setting stuff up about how you got your guy's license.
Yeah,
And you like to share that one?
yeah. I guess because I graduated in '61, and I was 17 years old, and I spent a lot of time with Junior York's up at Junior York's camps there at Daisy Pond, and around Elmer Woodworth was an old time trapper and guide at Millnocket Lake, and I knew all these people that were guides, and it just seemed interesting, and of course I'm on my way to college, but I'm going to get a guide's license anyway, so I go to the warden, Elmer Knowlton in Millnocket, and I asked him about the guide's license, and I says, well, what have I got to do? And he said, well, there's a test, you have to take a test. And he says, yeah. I says, okay, yeah. And I said, I got to take you on a canoe trip down the river, a river trip, and serve a shore lunch. He said, laugh. He said, Don, he says, from the time you were 14 years old, I watched you pedal your bike down a Bear Brook, which is about 15 miles from the house, and catch your limit of trout. He says, I watch you fishing in the fishway at North Wind Dam. He says, I've watched you, lugging water up to Junior York's camps and putting firewood on the porches. And he says, I've seen you my whole life. He says, you ain't going to have to take me for a shore lunch. He says, but you got to be 18. And I said, of course, I was a week or so for my birthday. So he said, come back over the day before. So I come over and he hands me the test. It's a 100-question test. He says, you can't do this till 12 o'clock tonight, And I said, yeah, okay, man. And he says, and Don, he says, when you bring that back, if you get one question wrong, he says, don't ever speak to me again. You go home, get your law book out, and do your test.
Yep.
It's amazing how things have changed. 'Cause now they got so many guide schools out there, 3 or 4 day school to teach people on how to pass a test.
Test, yeah.
Yeah.
It's different.
It's not necessarily on like what you know and your history and that. It's teach you how to pass a test. No different than being in 8th grade.
Yeah.
And studying for a test. It's the same thing.
I won't say his name, but one of the fellows that worked for me for years had gone down to take his guides test. And went down to take the guides test, and they're in there asking him questions, and one of the wardens says, what's the cock of the woods? He says, the game wardens. He says, no. He says, that's the prick. He says, but it is the pileated woodpecker.
Well, that will do it for this episode. Please hit subscribe and follow along, and we'll see you next time on Through the Eyes of a Maine Guide.